All right, for those who were able to join us last weekend for our family party, it was a really fun time. If you weren't able to join us, that's okay. We have one of those every year. The theme's always a little bit different. It was awesome, so there will be another one coming. In 2007, I got to do the coolest thing I think that I've ever gotten to do in my life. I rode a bicycle from San Francisco, California, down the Pacific Coast Highway, through Malibu, through Long Beach, through Monterey Bay, if you're a golfer, right next to Pebble Beach Golf Course, all the way down to San Diego. And then from San Diego, we rode north just a little bit, and then we rode east over the Sierra Nevada mountains, down the backside into the desert. And there's a place in Southern California called the Imperial Sand Dunes, which are not sand dunes like you would see in the Sahara, obviously, as far as the size of them, but like just big piles of sand that you can run around on and all those things. It's really neat. Continued east over the Colorado River and ended in Phoenix, Arizona. It was about 1,100 miles in 21 days. Now, a wise person would have trained and prepared for that trip. A less than wise person would not have. I will let you decide which you think perhaps I fell into. We'll just say the first few days were really hard. If you've never been to Southern California, I'd never been to Southern California before. If you've never been, it's very mountainous. It's gorgeous. Coming south out of San Francisco, there's hills and the cliffs and the Pacific Ocean, which looks like a completely different body of water than the Atlantic Ocean somehow. It's really, really incredible. It's so beautiful. In fact, as we got further south, like just south of Monterey Bay, there's a place called Big Sur. And if you've never seen Big Sur before, I wanted to show you. It's unbelievably gorgeous. That's Big Sur. So there's a national park there, and in this particular stretch of California, they don't run the Pacific Coast Highway along the Pacific Coast. I imagine because who would want to mess that up? Rather, the road runs inland just a little bit, and then it dumps back out. You can't really see it, but there's a little spot, if you zoom way in on the image, where the Pacific Coast Highway comes back out and ends up right on the coast. And so again, I'm a kid from central Ohio. Like, I'm used to cornfields, right? I mean, like, the biggest cliff I ever saw was like going into a creek. And so this was it was breathtaking. It was incredible. Now, to kind of drive the point home a little bit more, I'm riding a bicycle, right? We've already established mostly that I hadn't prepared. I hadn't ridden a bike in years. And we're riding on the shoulder of the Pacific Coast Highway. And then for the most part on this trip, it's like road, guardrail, cliff, ocean, all right? I mean, like, for example, I got some pictures of a bridge called the Big Creek Bridge, which is a very famous bridge. That's a bridge we rode across, okay? So we're riding along the road here. You can see, there's just cliffs. If that doesn't drive the point home enough, there was actually, in 2021, part of the Pacific Coast Highway collapsed into the Pacific Ocean. So I rode that stretch, fortunately 14 years earlier, so... I still kind of have a hard time even wrapping my head around how a road just goes, I assume they've rebuilt it at this point. You would think that'd be necessary, but that happened. Now, the trip was amazing. It was incredible. I had such a good time. But there was one particular part where things almost turned out pretty badly. And I Google image searched like crazy, and I think I found a picture of the exact spot where this happened. So this right here is a stretch of Big Sur. What you can see from it, obviously, like, the road's very windy, right? What you can't see as much is the elevation. And so not only is the road doing this, but the road's also doing this. Now, this particular curve right here, kind of in the middle, this big one, we were riding south, so we were coming down this way. And as we're riding along, I'm going, and we kind of came up the backside of that hill. You would come up. So we came up, we crested the hill, I started to coast, and we got ready to go around that really, really big turn that would have been to my left, right? And as I was getting closer to the curve, I'm like, all right, I'm doing good, just coasting. And we got to where I started to turn, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm going fast. Like, way faster than I thought. And so I go to hit the brakes. Now, again, mind you, I haven't ridden a bike since I'm like 8. I've hit the brakes a lot in the ensuing days, but I haven't done it tons. So I go to hit the brakes. These are like, we have a bike mechanic crew with us. These brakes are tuned. They're touchy, which is the way you want brakes. Like you want to touch them and they work, right? So I'm coasting. I hit the brakes and in my mind, the back wheel lifts off the ground. Like my momentum shifts forward. For sure, I'm thinking I'm going over this cliff. Like that. Somehow, and to this day, I still honestly have no idea how, but I managed to let off the brakes, navigate the turn, and then immediately my heart began to beat about 247 beats per minute. My blood pressure, just the adrenaline, right? And I remember coming around this curve and thinking like, that's as close to death as I've ever been. Because the reality was, if I wouldn't have been able to let off the brakes, and if I had just a little bit more in my mind, listen, maybe it wasn't quite as bad as I remember, but I remember it being bad. If I would have gone any further, like there wasn't space there. I would have gone over a cliff into the Pacific Ocean, like 100 feet down. Now, the problem that day was primarily my lack of experience, because there was actually a solution to this problem that never once in that moment crossed my mind, and that even if it had, I wouldn't have had any idea how to do it. But there was a solution. The solution was, if it had gotten any worse, I could have laid the bike down because there were guardrails there. Now, I'd have been tore up. It would not have been pleasant. But if I would have known how to lay the bike down and just slide into the guardrail, I'd have been hurt badly, but I wouldn't have gone over a cliff. And although laying a bike down and sliding across asphalt into a guardrail doesn't sound fun, it sounds a whole lot better than going over that cliff. Guardrails are funny things because guardrails are things we don't think about until we need them, and hopefully we never do. But in a moment when we do, things might not end up great if we hit a guardrail, but they end up a whole lot better than they would be if the guardrail didn't exist. Now, the last couple weeks we've been in a message series called Foundations. And in this series, we're looking at 4 principles to have good relationships in our life, like to have relational health in our lives. In the first week, I kind of did a poll and asked everybody if you have relationship problems. And wouldn't you know it, 100% of people raised their hand. Well, not 100%. Some of you lied, but because you didn't raise your hand for either question. But I asked, who has problems in their relationships, right? Everybody has issues. Everybody has some relationship somewhere. A lot of us have a lot of relationships with issues. And so we're looking at 4 principles to have healthy relationships. In part 1, we talked about communication. And in every week, we're asking 2 questions. Why does this matter? And how do we do it? Because for a lot of us, we've never seen these things modeled in a healthy way. So we talked about communication in part 1. In part 2, we talked about how to have healthy conflict and the importance of actually having healthy conflict in our relationships. And then last week was Fifth Sunday, and so we didn't have a regular service. Today, we're continuing by talking about boundaries, how to have healthy boundaries. And then next Sunday, we're going to finish up on Mother's Day. It's hard to believe Mother's Day is almost here, but we're going to finish up on Mother's Day talking about forgiveness, which is probably the hardest issue in relationships. So I passed that one off to Rachel. It's great. It's critical that we get these things right. Now, today, as we look at boundaries, kind of as I was preparing and thinking about this, I try every week to identify like what's a problem that needs to be solved. As people, we're wired to remember things that we need to remember because it fixes a problem. We're not really wired to just remember information. That's why for a lot of us, we don't remember anything from college or from high school because we knew already even then we were never going to use it. And so our brains just tend to not remember it. And so I try every week to come up with what's a problem that needs to be solved. Now, we all have relationship problems. That's easy, right? But I think if we dig a little bit deeper, there's a major problem that boundaries address. For a lot of us, we're really, really tired. And that could be from a variety of factors. Maybe you have kids. I have 3 kids, 9, 8, 4. Anytime I run into a college friend or a high school friend that I haven't seen in a long time, they say, hey, how you doing? I'm just tired, man. I used to have energy, and it's just gone. It never have energy anymore. Just tired. I'm good, but I'm tired, right? I'm worn down. I'm weary. A lot of people, maybe it's kids, maybe it's family stuff, maybe it's a really demanding job. There could be any number of factors, but for a lot of us, we're tired. Now, here's the problem. When we're emotionally worn out, all of our relationships suffer as a result of that. Because the more worn out we are, and then we talk about things like how do we have healthy communication and how do we have healthy conflict. And for a lot of us, we're like, oh my goodness, I don't have any more to give. We talked about how conflict is actually a good thing. Well, I'm too tired for conflict, you know? And so when we're worn out, then we're tired, and then doing the things that are required, because relationships are work. Doing the things required to make relationships healthy is daunting. And sometimes when we're real worn out, we end up actually creating more mess in those relationships, even the good ones. And then there's this cycle that happens where we end up doing some unhealthy things in our relationships, and now we've got to muster up the energy to fix the unhealthy thing, but we don't have the energy to fix the unhealthy thing in the first place. And then it can just cycle and cycle. And for some of us, in the worst of scenarios, maybe in certain seasons of our lives, for some of us, we end up feeling like there's this mountain of relationship problems that we just don't know how to tackle, and we're too tired to even begin. Well, boundaries, I think, are the solution to that problem. I think boundaries are the solution to that problem. That no matter how far down that road we may be, no matter how tired, no matter how worn out, the answer to that problem is boundaries. Now, for a lot of us, we may not really think about boundaries as a biblical thing, but they are. The Bible doesn't come out and just say, hey, make sure you establish healthy boundaries in your relationships. It doesn't say it explicitly like that. But the Bible absolutely 100% brings out boundaries in a variety of arenas. Now, as we look through some scripture today, I want to be very clear up front that I'm going to oversimplify a lot of this. I'm going to kind of boil boundaries down to what I think are the core of them. But for a lot of us, there may be personality stuff, there may be mental health stuff, there could be all kinds of different factors playing into the exhaustion, the frustration if you're in that boat. But regardless of all those factors, the principles that underlie boundaries remain the same. We're going to jump in today starting in the book of Proverbs. Now, Proverbs is one of my favorite books because Proverbs are just these short little wisdom sayings that for the most part don't require context. So typically there's not anything before or after the individual proverb that we need to understand the proverb itself. They're just wisdom sayings. They're pretty easy to grasp. They're pretty easy to understand. As an example, Proverbs 25:17 says this: seldom set foot in your neighbor's house. Too much of you and they will hate you. Did you know that was in the Bible? Introverts everywhere rejoiced. I don't have to hang out with people, yeah. That's not what that says. However, it is pretty clear. You ever have that neighbor that won't stop showing up at your house? And I know all of you, we're too nice of people, right? We're all so nice and we just deal with it and put up with it. But under the hood, we're like, oh my gosh, they can't read social cues. And we are giving them all kinds of social cues to get out of here. You know? You ever have that person? Hey, they had those people 3,500 years ago too. And Solomon was like, don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. Don't show up unannounced at your neighbor's house too much. Now listen, if you're sure, you can do that some. But listen, you extroverts, take note. Us introverts are already peopled out. And you're peopling us out more. All right? Now, in all seriousness, there's a boundary in there. There's a boundary. The boundary is don't overstay your welcome. Be smart. Be wise about the way that you inject yourself into other people's lives. Because if you cross that boundary too many times, you will do relational harm. Right? Simple, easy. Let's look at another one. Proverbs 26:4. I like this one. Don't respond to the stupidity of a fool. You will only look foolish yourself. I like that one. That's a good one. Don't respond to the stupidity of a fool. You will only look foolish yourself. We could call this the don't wade in on Facebook proverb. Right? Stay out of it. It's dumb. You're not changing anybody's mind. You're just going to end up looking dumb too. Okay? By the way, that goes for all social media. Don't wade in. Don't respond to the stupidity of a fool. You will only look foolish yourself. Similarly, there's a boundary in here. If people are engaging in an argument that is foolish, if somebody comes to you and wants to confront you with something that is foolish, just keep your mouth shut. Some of you are really good at keeping your mouth shut. Others of you are wired like me and like we just don't know how to stop, right? I don't think there's ever been a conflict or a confrontation or an issue with another person that in retrospect I've thought, you know what I wish I would have done? I wish I would have talked more. Just don't. Just stop. All right, here's one more. Proverbs 19:19. A hot-tempered person must pay the penalty. Rescue them, and you will have to do it again. A hot-tempered person must pay the penalty. Rescue them, and you will have to do it again. In other words, set a boundary for yourself. Parents, this is huge. Set a boundary for yourself not to rush in and fix everything when some kind of a consequence happens as a result of big emotions. Parents, if your kid does something dumb and gets themselves in trouble, don't fix it for them. You know why? Because you'll have to do it again and again and again and again and again. They'll never learn. So, don't fix it. Let the consequences happen. There's a boundary there. The boundary is I'm going to be wise with when I inject myself into the situations around me with people that I care about, understanding that it's for their benefit if I allow consequences to happen. I actually skipped one, and it's my favorite one of the bunch. So we're going to go back. Proverbs 26:4. Oh, no, I didn't. Man, I didn't do the other version of it. I'm sorry. I messed that up. It's unfortunate. Go back to Proverbs 26:4 for me, Dave. I want to show you the way the Message says it because it's my favorite. It says, don't respond to the stupidity of a fool. You only look foolish yourself. It's like don't wade into stupid arguments with stupid people, you know. Like, they're stupid people sometimes. Sometimes I'm the stupid people. Sometimes you're the stupid people. Just wait. Anyway, sorry. I apologize. I wanted to go back and say that. I missed it. As we jump out of Proverbs, that stuff's good. It's important. But I don't want you to think that there's just this one isolated book with a few random things that talks about boundaries. In fact, Jesus set some boundaries in his life. And my guess is that for most of us, I mean, you may have been a Christian your whole life. You may be a Christian for 5 minutes. You may not be a Christian today at all. Most of us, when we think about Jesus, I don't think the first thing we think about is, yeah, Jesus set boundaries. I've been a Christian my whole life. I've never really even thought about that. But wouldn't you know that when I started to research this, I found that Jesus set boundaries. So we're going to look at the book of Luke today to start. I'm going to give you 3 examples of Jesus setting some boundaries. Now, in this particular story, what's been happening behind the scenes is that Jesus has been healing people. He's been doing miracles. He's been doing all this stuff that people can't quite explain. And as that happens, as word is getting out, more and more people are flocking to follow Jesus. And then Jesus does a funny thing. He starts telling people, hey, don't tell anybody what I did. I just healed you of this crazy thing. Just don't tell anybody. That seems a little odd, doesn't it? Like, why would Jesus, when he's healing people, why would he tell people to keep it quiet? Well, Luke explains to us why a little bit in Luke 5:15 and 16, when he says, yet the news about him, about Jesus, spread all the more so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sickness. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Now, on the surface, you might go, well, that doesn't really say why. It does, though. Jesus recognized that he needed to prioritize certain things. He recognized that he couldn't be all things to all people, and that if there were 100 people that needed healed, that was fine. But if he healed all 100 of them and he didn't spend time with his Father, that wasn't a win. It wasn't a win. Jesus recognized that there were things that he must do, and what he must do was spend time with his Father, because that relationship was his source. And without it, it didn't matter how much other good he did. And so Jesus said, hey, keep quiet, because I think Jesus didn't want people coming to him and then leaving disappointed when he didn't have time for them. Is that an image that you get of Jesus when you think about him? People leaving disappointed that Jesus didn't get to him in line? Let's jump to another example. In John's gospel, John records a similar type of thing. Remember, Luke said that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Jesus established a boundary that I can't do it all, so I'm going to do what I must. Now, John records a similar thing. In John's gospel, Jesus had just gotten done doing this crazy miracle where he fed thousands of people from a tiny little basket of food. And when he does this, everybody's amazed. And they start thinking, there's like this group think that's happening. And I imagine the scene, and like there's probably people murmuring, and Jesus starts to pick up on what's happening. And what they want to do is they want to make him a king. Because they had been waiting. They had been waiting on a Messiah, a conqueror, a savior. And they think maybe it's this guy. Did you see what he just did? And then John records this. He says, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him a king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. And so here again, similar situation. This time it's not Jesus meeting everybody's needs. It's Jesus recognizing, I have a mission. I have a job. I have a purpose that was given to me by my Father. I must do that. What these people want is different than that. And I must not do that. They want to make me a king by force. But that's not what I'm supposed to do. And so I'm going to draw a boundary and not allow other people to impose their will and their plans on me. Rather, I'm going to leave again. So here we see this pattern of Jesus recognizing what he must do and recognizing what he must not do. Let me show you one more example of boundaries in Jesus' life that I think is probably the most challenging one. Earlier in John's gospel, John records a really interesting interaction that Jesus has with some people. It says, now while he being Jesus, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. Let's pause. That sounds like a really good thing, right? We think about like the most important job of a church, the most important job of Christians is to help people find Jesus, right? Believe in Jesus. And so here we have Jesus has been doing lots of stuff and people are starting to believe in him. But Jesus doesn't respond in the way that I would imagine and that probably you would imagine. John continues and says, but Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. Have you ever had somebody, I assume that at some point in your life, you've all met a new person, right? Appreciate that, Scott. You know that when you meet somebody new, you keep them at arm's length. I mean, we do, right? This is a natural subconscious boundary that we all take part in. Why? Because we don't know if we can trust them. And if we don't know if we can trust the person, like I'm going to avoid unnecessary pain and problems by not bearing my heart to the person that I just met. This makes perfect sense, right? This is what Jesus does, except Jesus doesn't need time to get to know the person. He already knows. What Jesus knows is that what these people are believing in isn't him, it's what he's doing. And that's very different. So they see the miracles, they see the things that Jesus is doing, and they're like, oh, wow, those are amazing things. I believe in this guy. But Jesus knows that at the end of the day, things are going to get harder. And Jesus knows that when they get harder, these people's faith is shallow and it's weak. It won't last. And so Jesus holds back a part of himself. He establishes a relational boundary for a reason. The question is why? Why would Jesus establish boundaries in these ways? Why would Jesus not heal all the people that needed healed? Why would Jesus not allow the people, like if what the people wanted was to make him king, why didn't Jesus just allow it to happen? Why didn't Jesus entrust himself? And why instead did he keep himself at arm's length from people? I think the reason why is that Jesus understood a really important truth that we see in the Proverbs that we read, that we see in the examples from his life. See, Jesus would have known what we now know as the Old Testament of the Bible. He would have had it memorized front and back. He was a Jewish rabbi. It was required that they memorized what we now know as the Old Testament. Also, Jesus was the Son of God. Probably part of the job description. So Jesus would have known the Proverbs that we read. Jesus also would have known a proverb that we didn't read yet, but that I think is kind of the key to understanding why Jesus would have established these boundaries. Jesus would have known that in Proverbs 4, it says, above all else, guard your heart. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. I actually really like the way the ESV, the English Standard Version, translates this verse. It says, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. I love that image. The springs of life flow from your heart. Proverbs says, guard your heart. That's boundaries. Establish boundaries to protect the thing that your life flows out of. Because if you don't, the life will dry up. If you don't, the life will die. So establish boundaries to protect yourself. I believe that when Jesus is establishing these boundaries in his own life, that Jesus knows this. Jesus, the Son of God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the creator of you, the creator of me, knows the way relationships work best. He knows how people work best. Jesus knows that people, when we don't establish healthy boundaries in our lives, one of two things happen. We underset or we overset boundaries. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but in either case, they don't yield good results. The reason why Jesus established boundaries and the reason why boundaries matter is that healthy boundaries keep me healthy for the people who need me healthy. That's the truth that I believe Jesus knew, that I believe the Bible lays out. This is why boundaries matter. Healthy boundaries, the right kind of boundaries, they keep me healthy for the people that need me healthy. Jesus had disciples that needed him healthy. Jesus had all of humanity that needed him healthy. And Jesus, being fully God, was also fully man. Meaning that Jesus had limited emotional capacity, limited time, limited energy, the same as you and I do. And within that, Jesus knew I can't be all things to all people. And if I try to be, I'll be nothing to no one. Rather, Jesus said, I'm going to do the things that I must do. I'm not going to not set boundaries. I'm not going to overset. See, when we don't set any boundaries at all, you know what happens? We end up emotionally depleted. When we never establish boundaries in our relationships, we end up emotionally depleted. Those of us here today who are the most emotionally exhausted, you're probably somebody who doesn't set enough boundaries relationally. Others of us overset boundaries. We don't just establish boundaries, we build walls. We build walls because we've been hurt and we've been broken. And it's happened so many times that we've just built these thick walls around ourselves to say, like, I'm not gonna let anybody in. If I don't let anybody in, nobody can hurt me again. But you know what happens when we overset boundaries? We become relationally depleted. When we underset, we're emotionally depleted. When we overset, we're relationally depleted. Nobody knows us. There's nobody in the world, for those of us that build walls, there's nobody that really knows who we are. And that's a lonely place to be. Jesus modeled a different way. Jesus modeled a middle way. Jesus modeled a place where we don't overset, we don't underset, we establish healthy boundaries, because when we set healthy boundaries, we stay healthy. And the people around us, our spouses, our kids, our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends, our small group, the people that need us healthy, we stay healthy. And we're able to love and serve them just the way Jesus intended. Now, there's two really difficult things I think about setting boundaries. One is that boundaries are more of an art than a science. Like, I can't just say, here are 7 boundaries to establish in your life, and your life will be better. I don't know that there are very many. I think there probably are some, but I don't know that there's very many universal boundaries that are applicable to all people at all times. And so that's a challenge. They're also challenging because for a lot of us, we don't have great reference points. I think that this is one of humanity's greatest struggles, to be real honest. Establishing good, healthy boundaries. So we don't know how to do it. We've never seen it modeled. It's different in every circumstance, in every situation, in every context. And so we don't necessarily know, like it's got to change, and we don't know what to do with that. And so what I want to do today is I want to give us a principle that can act as a target, as a way to kind of decide, is this a healthy boundary or not? We're going to look again to the words of Jesus in what's known as the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus had been doing kind of this longer form teaching about a bunch of different topics. And in the middle of it, Jesus talks about oaths, promises. And on the surface, it may not look like it's about boundaries, but I think it is, as we'll see in a minute. So Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 33, Jesus said, "Again, you have heard it said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made." Now, Jesus in this section was going back and forth and saying, you've heard it said, but I say. You have heard it said, but I say. And Jesus was quoting what to those people would have been, again, to us today, the Old Testament. He's quoting scripture to them and saying, this is what it said, but now I'm going to reframe it a little bit. So Jesus is quoting what to these people would have been a good thing. He says, don't break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. He continues, but I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And at this point, we're like, all right, what's the boundary thing here? The end is so fascinating to me. Jesus says, and do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. I've been preaching almost every Sunday for like 6 years, and I don't think I've ever used the New King James, but I'm going to use the New King James today. I love the way the New King James translates that end. It says, let your yes be yes, and let your no be no. Let your yes be yes, and let your no be no. Now, Jesus is talking about oaths and promises here, but isn't an oath or a promise just a boundary? An oath or a promise is saying, this is what I'm saying, my word is my bond, and this is the way it's going to be. And so if that is crossed, then this is what is going to happen. It's an oath, it's a promise. I'm going to do this thing, I'm not going to do this thing. It's a boundary. Aren't boundaries really, at the end of the day, all just a sequence of yeses or nos? I mean, if you really boil it down, Jesus, as he says no to all these people who need healing, he is saying yes to time with his Father. Jesus, at the point at which people want to make him king, is saying yes to God's plan, and he's saying no to everybody else's plan. Jesus, at the point at which he holds people at arm's length and says, I'm not going to entrust myself fully to you, Jesus is saying no to a weak, rootless faith. Boundaries are a series of yeses and nos. That's all they are. Any boundary, if you boil it down, at some point there's a root question that we're saying yes or we're saying no to. And so how do we set good boundaries? No matter the circumstance, no matter the situation, no matter what's led to it. I think the way that we determine if a boundary is good and is healthy, is we live by the principle, say yes to what you must, say no to what you must, and be wise with what's left. Say yes to what you must, say no to what you must, and be wise with what's left. We all have limited time. We have limited energy. We have limited emotional capacity. We all do. I mean, Jesus demonstrated this. And you aren't better at time management than Jesus was. I don't care how type A, extroverted, get it done. I don't care. You have limited time. You have limited energy. You have limited capacity. We all do. And there are things that we must say yes to. If you have a family, you must say yes to your family. You must. If you have kids, you must say yes to your kids. That came out wrong. Kids, that came out wrong. I'm going to cover that in a minute. If you have a job, you probably should say yes to your job. You have a Father in heaven, and just as Jesus did, we must say yes to him. What must you say no to? Or what must you say yes to? I don't know exactly. That's okay. Fortunately, you do have a Father in heaven. You have a Holy Spirit as a guide. You need to talk to him about those things and find out what the things are that he says you must say yes to. You must say no to some things. What must you say no to? I don't know. It's art. It's not science. But I know there are things in your life that you must say no to. Maybe it's the neighbor who won't stop coming over. Maybe it's a family member who is constantly demanding all of your time, energy, and attention. I don't know. Talk to God about it. Listen to what the Holy Spirit says to you. Say yes to what you must. Say no to what you must. And then here's what's going to happen. As you give your yeses and you give your nos, you're going to end up with time left over and energy left over. Be wise with it. Invest it well. Use it purposefully. If you need to recharge, recharge. If that means being alone, be alone. If it means being with people, be with people. Put habits and patterns in place in your life to be wise with what you have left. Say yes to what you must, no to what you must, and be wise with what's left. If you set boundaries from that place, you can begin to feel a release from the tension of the mountain of stuff. Now, really quickly, teens, kids, younger people, I cannot overemphasize the importance of learning this principle now. And if you think your parents are dumb, like if you and I were just sitting down, I was like, tell me the truth. Do you think your parents don't know anything? For those of you that are like, yeah, they do. And they would do anything to help you avoid the mistakes that they made. Parents, how many of you wish that you'd have lived by that earlier in your life? There we go. Say yes to what you must, no to what you must, and be wise with what's left. Teens, if you can learn this now in your life, you will save yourself so much heartache, I can't even begin to describe it to you. Parents, if you aren't living by this, live by it now, because your kids will model what they watch in you. And if what you're teaching them is that they control your time, then what's going to happen when they have a boss? What's going to happen when you aren't the person that's in authority over them anymore, but someone else is? Will they respect that person's authority? Kids model what they see. We're actually getting ready in a couple weeks to go into just a 2-part parenting series. And one of the weeks we're going to talk about, like, your kids aren't the center of the universe. Sorry. My kids aren't the center of the universe. Put this in place in your life. For all of us, if we can say yes to what we must, and if we can say no to what we must, and if we can be wise with what's left, we can get ourselves to a place where, listen, there will be relational tension, there will be problems, there's always going to be stuff because people are people. But we can get ourselves to a place where we stay healthier. Where when stuff is going wrong in one relationship, it doesn't just all bleed over and mess with the rest of them, because we've got boundaries in place that protect and guard our heart. And where the springs of life that flow out of it don't get quenched and don't dry up, because we just haven't thought about what we need to do to guard ourselves. Guard your heart. Say yes to what you must, no to what you must, and be wise with what's left. In doing it, you will establish health in your relationships. You will establish boundaries that protect the streams of water in your heart and allow them to pour out to everybody around you. Let's pray.